You must have seen in the news that Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese cancelled the Quad 2023 meeting, which was supposed to take place on May 24th in Sydney. By the way, if you want to know anything and everything about the Quad Alliance and the meetings they do, I have a separate video on it in which I have explained in detail everything related to the Quad Alliance. I'll put the link of that video in the top right corner. If you're interested, please watch it. In this video, I'm going to explain why this year's Quad meeting got cancelled. The first thing that you need to understand is that Australia was supposed to host this year's Quad summit. So it is the Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese who cancelled the meeting. The reason behind this cancellation was United States President Joe Biden's last-minute decision to cancel his visit to Australia. As you may know, the Quad Alliance consists of United States, Australia, India and Japan. So the cancellation of this year's Quad summit can be attributed to United States President Joe Biden's choice to forego attending the meeting, which subsequently led to its cancellation. Now the question is, why did Joe Biden cancel his visit to Australia? What is the reason behind it? By the way, before I answer this question, we must also realize the fact that how much weight the United States holds. That is the reason the entire summit got cancelled. Otherwise, had it been any other country apart from the United States, the other members of the group would have easily gone ahead with the meeting. But in this case, the entire meeting got cancelled because the US president had some other commitment. And then there is also another way of looking at it, since it was the Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese who officially cancelled the Quad meeting. That means it was in the hands of the Australian Prime Minister whether or not to go ahead with the meeting without the presence of the United States President. But then we all know that Australia and Japan are allies of the United States. They have no other option but to listen to what the US has to say. So it can be argued that maybe the US government has told the Australian government to not hold any official meeting in their absence. And if you hear this video clip,
I had a discussion with President Biden in the early hours of this morning. He expressed very much his disappointment at being unable to come to Sydney for the Quad leaders meeting and address the Parliament that had been scheduled for Canberra next week.
You will see that the Australian Prime Minister is saying that he had a conversation with the US President. That means there is something the US government must have said to the Australian government, and that is why they cancelled the Quad meeting. Now let me tell you why the US President cancelled his visit to Australia. So basically what happened is that the US government has a big problem that they have to solve before June 1st. They cannot avoid this problem. They have to somehow solve it, and that too before June 1st. And what is that problem? It is related to the US economy. United States is going to default on its debt at the end of this month if the US government fails to reach a new agreement. What do I mean by all of this? Let me explain in the simplest way possible. We all know that every country in this world has national debt. National debt is also known as public debt. It is the total amount of money that a government owes to its creditors, including individuals, institutions, and foreign governments. A country's national debt represents the accumulated borrowing over time to finance government expenditures that exceed revenue generated through taxes and other sources. So every country in this world has some national debt. But the United States of America has the highest national debt, which is currently, that is in 2023, is around $31.46 trillion. Here is the list of top 15 countries whose debt is very high. Although this data is from 2018, but you will get some idea. So the point is, the United States is the country with the highest national debt, which is $31.46 trillion. Now, if I have to tell you in the simplest manner, although this would be an oversimplified statement, but let me still say it. We can say that all the development that we see in United States is largely because of its debt, because debt has played an important role in United States growth and development. Debt has been used by the US government to finance infrastructure projects, fund public services, support economic stimulus measures, and invest in education and research, and there are plenty of other things. Now this statement is true for every country. It is not limited to United States. But then this video is about United States, so I'm telling this in context of United States. Therefore, it is very important for any country to assess its policies with respect to development and debt. Because the fact of the matter is, everybody wants to develop, but then development comes with a cost. A debt of a country is typically passed on to future generations. When a government incurs debt, it essentially borrows money that will need to be repaid with interest over a specified period. Suppose if the debt is not fully repaid during the current generation's time, the responsibility to repay the remaining debt falls on future generations. It is plain and simple. That is why I always say that every country needs to develop at its own pace. Just looking at another country, you cannot rush with your development idea. If you study the economy of Japan, it is a perfect case study that will tell you that Japan's desire for rapid development and economic growth has played a significant role in its high national debt. So now that you have understood, United States has the highest national debt in the world. Now what happened is that this year in January, the United States has reached its debt ceiling. Reaching the debt ceiling refers to a situation when a country's government has reached the maximum amount of debt it is legally allowed to borrow. Basically, a debt ceiling is a limit set by legislation that determines the maximum level of debt a government can incur. Otherwise, if there is no such legislation, then the government of a country will not have any limit on borrowing, and that can make the entire country go bankrupt. Similar to what is happening to Pakistan right now. As you know, every 4 years, a newly elected government has the authority to govern United States of America and raise funds within a certain limit to implement its schemes and policies. Therefore, the United States debt ceiling is a legislative limit that determines how much debt the US Treasury Department may incur. So this year on January 19th, the Biden government has reached that debt ceiling. In simple words, the Biden government has spent more than what it has earned. Basically, the government expenditure is more than the government earnings. Now suppose if a government consistently spends more money than it generates in revenue, then it may need to borrow or cover the deficit. Now over time, this accumulation of debt can approach or even breach the predetermined debt ceiling set by legislation. Now, how did this happen? If you look at the debt ceiling legislation, it was introduced by the US Congress in 1917. That means in the past 100 years, anyone who comes into power, that is the Democratic Party or the Republican Party, they have routinely increased the debt ceiling through Congress. Because whenever the US Treasury Department could no longer pay the government bills, Congress had to act quickly and increase the limit. Now here is a graph that will show you that the United States debt has many times gone up faster than the debt ceiling. Therefore, this clearly tells us that the US government is constantly borrowing money with absolutely no regard for what it can possibly lead to. Then this year in Jan 2023, again the US national debt reached the debt ceiling. And this time it was under the presidency of Joe Biden. You have to go back to last year, which is in 2022, when this Russia-Ukraine conflict started. And the United States government, which is Joe Biden's government, the Democratic Party, they were spending money like water, giving aid and military equipment to Ukraine. Almost $80 billion was spent on Ukraine. This is BBC's report. There are other reports that suggest till now the United States has allocated nearly $150 billion in support of Ukraine. Whatever may be the right figure, but the point is this kind of excessive and unnecessary spending, then printing money whenever they want, and this way of rapidly reaching the debt ceiling limit will lead to increased borrowing costs for businesses and homeowners, and that will lead to drop in consumer confidence that could shock the US financial market and tip the economy into recession. And then ultimately, if the US economy, that is the US dollar, goes into recession, it will create havoc on global financial markets. That is why many countries are promoting de-dollarization, meaning many countries are substituting the US dollar as the currency used for trading oil and other commodities. The dominant role of the dollar in the global economy has given the United States massive power to influence other countries' economies. All this while, it has given the US the power to impose sanctions as a tool to achieve foreign policy goals. This is one reason for de-dollarization. And the second reason is, the United States also has this bad habit of printing money and distributing money in the form of physical currency, such as banknotes, as well as electronically, through various mechanisms including open market operations and lending facilities. They use this strategy to manage the stability of the economy. So even this is a reason of de-dollarization. And the third reason is, now that we are seeing United States debt is increasing massively year by year, and they are also reaching the debt ceiling limit frequently. So there is a high chance that the US government will default on its debt payment, and the US economy will dip into recession anytime. And that will definitely affect the international financial system. The central banks of many countries are aware of the scenario. Therefore, the smartest thing that any country's central bank can do is de-dollarize the economy as soon as possible, so that by reducing reliance on the US dollar, countries can better prepare themselves for potential financial crisis. Now, if you see, Russian banks have started using the China-based cross-border interbank payment system for international payments. And then China has also developed their second currency, that is renminbi, in 2015, which offers clearing and settlement services for participants in cross-border yuan payments and trade. And then if you see BRICS New Development Bank, it encourages trade and investment in national currencies by dispersing up to 50% of its loans in national currencies since 2015. After that, Asian central banks have over $400 billion of local currency swap lines and trade amongst themselves. Then in July 2022, the Reserve Bank of India unveiled a rupee settlement system for international trade by allowing special Vostro account in designated Indian banks. It is a step towards internationalizing the rupee. Similarly, the South African rand is used by several African countries. Then the Latin American countries are also moving towards greater inter-regional trade. And then bilateral currency swaps among ASEAN countries with China, Japan and South Korea is also increasing rapidly. So steps like this are being taken by governments of different countries to move away and reduce dependence on the US dollar. So this is the whole story. And this is the reason why US President Joe Biden has cancelled his visit to Australia for attending this year's Quad meeting. Basically, he has been forced to turn his attention to domestic politics. Because now his government has to form an agreement with the Republicans to prevent the United States government from defaulting on its debts at the end of this month. Well, it is also a reminder for the United States that it is high time that they should stop interfering and worrying about what is happening in other countries in the world. The United States should instead focus on domestic governance. United States is a developed country that possesses advanced infrastructure, technological capabilities, and a high standard of living for a significant portion of its population. While accumulating debt for domestic development may be deemed justifiable, but engaging in regional politics of different regions in the world also requires financial resources. After all, to be a leader of geopolitics, you need money. The country with most money has the power to influence the geopolitics of any region. However, this influential position comes with a price, which is the potential risk of economic instability. And currently, United States is facing that. I hope you found this video informative. Thank you for watching it.